Introduction. In 401 BC, 10,000 Greek mercenaries found themselves stranded deep in the Persian Empire, their leader dead, their path to safety unknown. What started as a promising campaign for fortune had quickly turned into a fight for survival. Now, lost and surrounded by hostile forces, these men faced the impossible: a march across mountains, deserts, and enemy territory, back to the safety of Greece. This philosopher-turned-commander quickly realized that survival wasn't just about brute force. It required strategy, unity, and above all, hope. Xenophon became the heartbeat of the 10,000, leading them through terrain so hostile it seemed to challenge the very notion of human endurance. And while he was certainly no seasoned soldier when he began, his leadership would prove that sometimes the best leaders are those who rise to the occasion when everyone else falters. The Campaign of Cyrus. Cyrus the Younger's campaign began with grand ambition. His plan was simple: gather an army, march into the heart of the Persian Empire, and overthrow his brother Artaxerxes II to take the throne. He recruited a large contingent of Greek mercenaries, veterans from the Peloponnesian War who were eager for riches and adventure. The journey started well. The Greeks, seasoned warriors, were confident. They had faced Persians before and triumphed. They believed this campaign would be more of the same, a series of quick victories followed by lavish rewards. Cyrus led them across Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and into Mesopotamia, the heartland of the Persian Empire. But when they reached the plains near Babylon, things took a dramatic turn. At the Battle of Cunaxa, Cyrus's forces clashed with those of his brother, Artaxerxes. The Greeks, as expected, performed admirably in combat. Their phalanx formation was nearly impenetrable, cutting through the Persian troops with precision and discipline. For a moment, it looked like victory was within grasp. But then, disaster struck. In the chaos of battle, Cyrus himself was killed. With his death, the entire campaign collapsed. The Greek mercenaries, who had been fighting under the assumption that victory would mean wealth and favor in the Persian court, now found themselves stranded deep within enemy territory. They had no leader, no allies, and no clear way home. To make matters worse, the Persians, under the rule of Artaxerxes, saw the death of Cyrus as an opportunity to eliminate these unwanted Greek intruders. The Greeks were suddenly not just stranded, they were hunted. This was the moment when the real story of the 10,000 began. The March of the 10,000. With Cyrus dead, the Greek mercenaries found themselves facing the ultimate test: a march home through hostile territory with no guide, no supplies, and no leadership. The journey ahead would span thousands of miles, across rivers, deserts, mountains, and the territories of tribes who would do anything to wipe them out. At first, there was chaos. The Greek commanders who had served under Cyrus were either executed or betrayed by the Persians. Morale plummeted, and the men were on the verge of mutiny. But in this critical moment, Xenophon stepped forward. He wasn't the highest-ranking officer, but he was, in many ways, the most qualified to lead, not because of his military experience, but because of his mind. Xenophon famously gave a speech that would become one of the most important moments in Greek military history. He reminded the soldiers that they still had their weapons, their comrades, and their determination. He argued that, despite the overwhelming odds, they could fight their way back to Greece if they stayed disciplined and focused. This speech wasn't just about rallying the men. It was about giving them a sense of control over their own fate when everything else seemed lost. With Xenophon taking the lead, the Greeks began their march north, aiming for the Black Sea, where they could hope to find ships to take them home. Along the way, they faced a constant barrage of challenges: hostile Persian forces, treacherous mountain paths, freezing temperatures, and dwindling supplies. Every day was a battle, not just with their enemies, but with the land itself. And yet, despite these overwhelming odds, the 10,000 marched on. One of the most iconic moments of the journey occurred when they finally reached the summit of Mount Thetches and saw the sea. For months, they had trekked across foreign lands, uncertain if they would ever find a way out. But when they saw the sea, Thalata, Thalata, the sea, the sea, the men erupted in joy. It was a moment of pure relief, symbolizing the end of their long and perilous journey. But the march wasn't over yet. They still had to make their way through more hostile lands before they could find a ship to take them back to Greece. At the heart of this desperate journey was Xenophon, a philosopher who had never planned to be a soldier, let alone a leader. But when chaos reigned, Xenophon's combination of courage, wisdom, and determination would turn him into the commander these men desperately needed. And even then, there would be challenges awaiting them in their homeland. Nonetheless, that sight of the sea became a beacon of hope, reminding them of how far they had come and how close they were to home. Leadership and strategy. Xenophon's leadership during the March of the 10,000 was nothing short of extraordinary, especially considering that he had never intended to lead an army in the first place. His ascent to command wasn't a result of rank or military training. It was born out of necessity. After the death of Cyrus and the betrayal of many Greek officers by the Persians, the soldiers were in desperate need of someone to take charge, and Xenophon stepped up. What made Xenophon's leadership so effective? First, it was his ability to inspire hope in the face of overwhelming despair. When the mercenaries found themselves leaderless and on the verge of collapse, Xenophon didn't just offer practical military advice, he rekindled a sense of purpose. In one of his most famous speeches, he reminded the soldiers that they were warriors who had fought alongside some of the greatest armies in history. He urged them not to wallow in defeat, but to rise to the challenge and seize control of their destiny. "We still have our weapons," Xenophon famously said, "and as long as we have those, we can fight our way home." It was a simple, yet profound message. They were not victims, but soldiers, and soldiers could always fight. His ability to communicate with the troops was a key part of his success. Xenophon wasn't a distant commander giving orders from the rear. He was often on the front lines with his men, sharing in their hardships. This earned him a deep respect and loyalty from the soldiers, who saw him as one of their own. The bond between Xenophon and his men became one of the most crucial elements of their survival. Moreover, Xenophon was strategic in how he managed the morale of the army. He understood that leadership wasn't just about barking orders. It was about keeping the spirit of the men alive during the darkest times. He encouraged his soldiers to look after one another, to share what little resources they had, and to maintain discipline even when it seemed pointless. In many ways, Xenophon's leadership was as much about psychology as it was about military tactics. Another aspect of his leadership was his skill in adaptive strategy. As the Greeks marched through hostile territories, Xenophon knew that brute force alone wouldn't be enough to ensure their survival. Instead, he relied on clever tactics and flexi. He organized the army into smaller mobile units that could react quickly to ambushes and threats from local tribes. This adaptability allowed the Greeks to defend themselves against much larger Persian forces by outmaneuvering them in difficult terrain. In addition to fighting their way through enemy lands, Xenophon also used diplomacy to secure safe passage when possible. Understanding that not every enemy could be defeated through force, he often negotiated with local tribes, offering them gifts or promising to pass through their lands without causing harm. By doing so, he was able to avoid unnecessary conflicts and conserve the army's dwindling strength. You could say Xenophon was using the ancient equivalent of, "let's not make things worse, okay?" This combination of resilience, tactical ingenuity, and a focus on maintaining morale kept the army together through some of the most challenging situations. Xenophon's leadership wasn't perfect. There were times of disagreement, and not every decision he made worked out. But his ability to stay calm under pressure and guide his men through chaos is what made the difference between life and death for the Phi. Xenophon's philosophical background also influenced his leadership style. A student of Socrates, he believed in the importance of reason and self-discipline. He often reflected on ethical questions during the march, considering the nature of leadership and the responsibilities of a commander. This philosophical perspective added depth to his decisions, as he constantly weighed not just what was practical, but what was right. One could argue that his greatest weapon wasn't the spear or the sword. How did a student of Socrates lead soldiers through one of the most harrowing survival marches in history? What lessons of leadership, strategy, and resilience can we draw from their story? Most importantly, how did these men find the strength to keep going when all seemed lost? This is the March of the 10,000, not just an ancient military campaign, but a timeless testament to the human spirit, the power of unity, and the will to survive against all odds. He was a thinker in the midst of warriors, and his ability to combine rational thought with action allowed him to navigate the many challenges they faced. It's like that moment in the movies when the unlikely hero, the brainy one, steps up and shows that brains can be just as important as brawn. The role of strategy in survival. Xenophon's strategy was not just about winning battles, it was about surviving the journey. He knew that the Greeks didn't have the luxury of time or resources, so every decision had to be calculated to conserve what little they had. They needed food, shelter, and rest, but these basic needs were often out of reach. Xenophon devised a series of survival strategies to keep the army moving. One of the most important strategies was foraging. The Greeks couldn't rely on supply lines, so they had to find their own food as they moved. Xenophon organized foraging parties to scout the surrounding areas for anything edible. This was dangerous work, as these small groups could easily be ambushed by local forces. However, it was essential for the survival of the army. Another key strategy was the use of geography. Xenophon understood the terrain they were marching through and used it to his advantage. He led the army along routes that would give them the highest ground during encounters with enemies. By positioning themselves on hills or mountain passes, the Greeks could defend against attacks more easily, using the natural landscape as a barrier. Xenophon's strategy also included rotating responsibilities among the men. Everyone had a role, whether it was guarding the camp at night, scouting ahead, or carrying wounded comrades. This sense of shared duty kept the soldiers engaged and reduced the chances of a total collapse in discipline. But no matter how well Xenophon planned, the march there were times when the soldiers were on the brink of starvation, and other times when they were forced to fight in harsh weather conditions. The terrain was unforgiving: rocky mountains, freezing winds, and deserts that stretched on without end. Every step forward was a victory in itself. Perhaps one of the most symbolic moments of the march came during one of these impossible climbs. As the army struggled up a steep, icy mountain path, Xenophon reportedly kept moving among his soldiers, urging them to keep going. He knew that if they stopped, they would freeze to death in the unforgiving cold. This moment became a metaphor for the entire journey, the constant struggle to keep moving forward, even when it seemed like they would never make it. In the end, Xenophon's greatest achievement wasn't just leading the 10,000 out of Persian territory. It was keeping them united. Through his combination of strategic thinking, inspirational leadership, and sheer determination, he guided his men through one of the most extraordinary survival marches in history. And when they finally reached the Black Sea, it was a moment of triumph that would resonate through the ages. The lessons from Xenophon's leadership during the March of the 10,000 still echo today. His ability to adapt, inspire, and lead through adversity is a timeless example of what it means to be a true Leo. Whether in military, business, or life, Xenophon's story reminds us that leadership is not about power. It's about responsibility, resilience, and the courage to push forward when the odds are against you. The return home. The moment the 10,000 Greeks saw the Black Sea, they erupted into shouts of joy. Thalata! Thalata! The sea! The sea! After months of grueling marches through hostile territories, that distant glimpse of the sea represented hope, survival, and the promise of home. But as exhilarating as that moment was, their journey wasn't over yet. In fact, reaching the sea marked the beginning of another set of challenges. The Greeks had survived ambushes, freezing mountain passes, and sweltering deserts. But the coast they had arrived at wasn't exactly a bustling port filled with ships ready to take them back to Greece. They had reached the region of Trapezus, modern-day Trabzon, Turkey, a Greek colony on the southern coast of the Black Sea, but now faced the difficult task of securing passage across the sea and negotiating safe passage through the lands they would still have to cross. It was at this point that Xenophon's leadership, diplomacy, and patience were tested once more. The soldiers were exhausted, their supplies were running low, and tensions were rising. Historical context. Great. I'll continue the script from the historical context section, following the style of the introduction you preferred. Historical context. The 5th century BC was a time of political turmoil and shifting power dynamics. At the heart of these conflicts stood the Persian Empire, a vast and sprawling superpower, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to India. Under rulers like Darius I and Xerxes, Persia had expanded aggressively, clashing with the fiercely Anti. Although they had reached the sea, they still had no clear way to get home. Worse, local rulers saw the Greek army as a potential threat, or at best, a nuisance that could disrupt the balance of power in the region. Diplomacy and patience, Xenophon knew that brute force wouldn't be enough to secure the ships and supplies they needed to complete their journey. His army, despite being battle-hardened, was now more of a desperate, wandering band of survivors than a disciplined fighting force. So, instead of marching on any city to force their way to safety, Xenophon employed diplomacy. One of the major challenges was dealing with local powers who were both wary and opportunistic. The Greek mercenaries had a reputation, and it wasn't always a good one. While they were formidable in battle, they could also be seen as a roaming band of heavily armed soldiers with no real loyalty. Xenophon had to convince these rulers that the 10,000 posed no threat and only sought passage home. He offered them peace, sometimes gifts, and on a few occasions, a promise that they would fight in defense of the region if necessary. It was like Xenophon had turned into the ultimate negotiator, less sword, more silver tongue. However, diplomacy wasn't always successful. In some regions, they were met with resistance and had to use force to secure what they needed. It was a constant balancing act. Strike too soon, and they might create new enemies. Wait too long, and they could starve. Xenophon, as always, walked that fine line between warrior and statesman, always weighing the risks and rewards of each decision. Internal struggles. The challenges weren't just external. After months of hardship, some of the Greek soldiers began to grow impatient and rebellious. Factionalism emerged within the ranks, as groups of soldiers wanted different things. Some wanted to settle down in a friendly city along the coast. Others were determined to return home as quickly as possible, while others saw the opportunity to continue fighting as mercenaries for any local ruler who would pay them. Xenophon, who had held the army together through some of the toughest conditions imaginable, now had to deal with political maneuvering and infighting. It wasn't enough to simply lead the men in battle anymore. Now he had to convince them to stay united and disciplined long enough to finish the journey. One of Xenophon's great strengths as a leader was his ability to persuade rather than command. He called meetings, listened to the concerns of his men, and addressed their frustrations. He reminded them of what they had been through together, how far they had come, and how close they were to finally achieving their goal of returning home. And in moments when even persuasion wasn't enough, Xenophon showed he could still take charge decisively, making tough calls for the good of the entire group. In one instance, a group of soldiers wanted to split off and join a local city, believing they'd be better off settling down rather than continuing the march. Xenophon knew that if the army fractured, their chance of survival would diminish. He urged them to stay together, warning that splitting up in unfamiliar and hostile lands would leave them vulnerable. This combination of rational argument and emotional appeal kept most of the army united. Fighting and feasting. Despite their hardships, there were moments of celebration and camaraderie. After months of surviving on meager rations, when the 10,000 arrived in Trapezus, they were welcomed with. These feasts weren't just a way to replenish their strength. They were crucial for maintaining morale. It was a chance for the men to relax, share stories, and, for a brief moment, forget the horrors they had faced. Xenophon himself organized several sacrifices and religious festivals to give thanks to the gods for their survival. These rituals not only reflected the Greeks' deep religious beliefs, but also served as a way to strengthen the bond among the soldiers. In times of war, shared rituals could be just as powerful as shared battles. But it wasn't all feasting and toasting to the gods. The Greeks still had to deal with hostile forces that would occasionally raid their camps or try to ambush them. It was a strange mix of moments of peace and sudden outbreaks of violence, a constant reminder that their journey wasn't over until they were back in Greece. The famous battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis were only a few examples of how Greece and Persia had locked horns, their tensions simmering in the years that followed. But while Greece had repelled Persian invasions, it was not immune to internal strife. The city-states were often at odds with one another, leading to events like the brutal Peloponnesian War, which pitted Athens against Sparta. In the aftermath of this war, many Greek soldiers found themselves without clear allegiances. The final leg. After securing ships to take them across the Black Sea, the 10,000 finally began the journey back to Greece proper. Even this stage wasn't without its difficulties. The sea voyage was treacherous, with rough waters and the constant threat of pirates who preyed on vulnerable ships. Once again, Xenophon's leadership was crucial in keeping the soldiers disciplined and focused on the ultimate goal. After landing in Thrace, modern-day northern Greece and Bulgaria, the Greeks still had to march across hostile territories. They passed through the lands of Thracian tribes who were not always friendly. In some cases, they had to fight their way through, while in others, they managed to negotiate safe passage. Finally, after months of hardship, endless battles, and more than a few brushes with death, the 10,000 made it home. Their return to Greek soil was not the triumphant celebration they might have envisioned, but it was a testament to their endurance and to Xenophon's leadership. For Xenophon, the journey was more than just a military feat. It was a personal transformation. The philosopher who had set out as a mercenary returned as a battle-hardened leader, and while he would go on to write his account of the journey in Anabasis, reflecting on the lessons of leadership and survival, it's clear that the experience changed him profoundly. Conclusion of the journey. The March of the 10,000 remains one of the most remarkable stories of survival in history. Xenophon's leadership during the journey is often studied not just for its military brilliance, but for the way it highlights the importance of resilience, adaptability, and the human capacity to endure against overwhelming odds. His ability to inspire men, negotiate when needed, and fight when required ensured that what began as a hopeless situation ended in survival. As the Greeks finally dispersed to their homes, the legend of the March of the 10,000 began to spread. It wasn't just a story about soldiers fighting their way out of Persia. It was about the strength of the human spirit, the power of leadership, and the will to survive no matter the circumstances. closing the journey. As the 10,000 finally dispersed to their homes, they were not the same men who had left Greece months earlier. They had marched through fire and ice, crossed mountains and deserts, and faced enemies both within and without. But under the leadership of a philosopher-turned-soldier, they had survived. Xenophon, once an intellectual student of Socrates, had become a commander whose name would be etched into the annals of history. The story of the March of the 10,000 is one of human endurance at its finest. It is not simply a tale of soldiers fighting their way home, but of the spirit of camaraderie, the power of leadership, and the unbreakable will to survive. Through every battle, every hard-fought step, Xenophon showed that leadership is not about titles or experience. It's about the ability to inspire hope when all seems lost. The legacy of Xenophon and his men resonates through time, not just as a military success, but as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. From the heights of their desperation to the cries of "Thalata, Thalata," upon seeing the sea, their journey remains a powerful reminder that with courage, unity, and a bit of strategy, even the most impossible obstacles can be overcome. Whether we find ourselves in personal struggles or facing challenges that seem insurmountable, Xenophon's story reminds us that there is always a way forward. The road may be long and the path unclear, but as long as we have our comrades by our side and the will to keep marching, we can find our way home. So, as we close the chapter on the March of the 10,000, we take with us not just a history lesson, but a reminder. True leadership is tested in adversity, and the strength to carry on is often found when we least expect it. These battle-hardened veterans turned to mercenary work, fighting for anyone who could pay. This is where Cyrus the Younger, a Persian prince with ambitions to overthrow his brother, Artaxerxes II, enters our story. Cyrus saw an opportunity: hire Greek mercenaries, known for their unmatched prowess in battle, to bolster his forces. He promised them wealth and glory, and thousands signed up for what seemed like an easy victory in Persian lands. But as history would soon show, nothing would go as... The stage was set for an epic confrontation, but more than that, for a grueling journey that would become legendary: the March of the 10,000. Philosopher-turned-soldier Xenophon was not a man destined for war. Born in Athens around 430 BC, he grew up amidst philosophical discussions, not battlefield strategies. As a young man, he was deeply influenced by Socrates, his teacher, whose emphasis on virtue, ethics, and the examined life shaped Xenophon's worldview. However, Xenophon's life took an unexpected turn when he decided to join the army of Cyrus the Younger. It wasn't the search for glory that led Xenophon to Persia, but a combination of adventure and curiosity. He had little experience in combat, let alone the leadership skills required to command troops in the field. But as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention, and Xenophon would soon find himself thrust into a position where he had to learn quickly. When Cyrus was killed in the Battle of Cunaxa, the Greeks were left leaderless and deep in enemy territory. The once promising campaign had become a nightmare of survival. While many of the Greek generals were either captured or executed, Xenophon, the philosopher, rose to the occasion. At first, he wasn't even a formal leader, just another soldier sharing in the hardships of the group. But his intellect, his ability to rally the men, and his calm under pressure soon made him indispensable.
By my side, intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide, intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today, because content like this just lights my way, intense and slow.